In the humid, rot-scented air of Port Moresby, New Guinea, there was a place where machines went to die. It was called the Boneyard. In 1943, this was an elephant graveyard of twisted aluminum and scavenged engines. And sitting in the middle of this scrap heap was a B-17 flying fortress that even the bravest mechanics refused to touch. Its serial number was 41-2666. To the superstitious pilots of the 5th Air Force, that 666 wasn't just a number, it was a prophecy. The plane was a hangar queen, a sluggish, unresponsive lemon that wallowed in the air like a wounded whale. It was destined for the scrap torch until a loose cannon pilot named Jay Zeamer walked into the graveyard. Zeamer didn't see a cursed wreck, he saw an opportunity for industrial spite. This is the story of Old 666, a plane that was technically banned from the flight line, a crew of misfits nobody else wanted, and the 40-minute street fight over Bougainville that produced 2 Medals of Honor and a kill count that defied the laws of physics. Jay Zeamer was a problem for the military bureaucracy. At 25 years old, he was too aggressive, too independent, and he suffered from chronic insomnia. He spent his nights wandering the flight line with a flashlight, obsessed with maps and engines. The brass called him an eager beaver, a derogatory term for a pilot who took uncalculated risks. Because no commander wanted to give Zeamer a standard plane, he decided to build his own. He recruited a crew of renegades from the brig and the bars. His right hand was Joseph Sarnowski, a bombardier who was the best shot in the Pacific, but had a legendary hatred for discipline. Together, they spent their days in the Boneyard, resurrecting Old 666. But they didn't just fix it, they re-engineered it for murder. Standard B-17s were designed for defensive formation flying. Zeamer and Sarnowski wanted a lone wolf. They stripped parts from other wrecks and began an illegal modification of the airframe. The most radical change was the pilot's gun. Zeamer bolted a fixed .50 caliber machine gun to the floor of the cockpit, aimed straight forward. He turned a 30-ton heavy bomber into the world's largest, slowest fighter plane. In June 1943, the U.S. High Command needed a map of Bougainville. It was a Japanese fortress ringed with hundreds of Zeros and dense anti-aircraft batteries. To get the high-resolution photos needed for an invasion, a plane had to fly in a straight line for 20 minutes, no dodging, no weaving in broad daylight. It was a suicide note. Every veteran pilot turned the mission down. The math was simple. 1 bomber versus 100 Zeros equals 0 survivors. Zeamer walked into the operations tent and volunteered. The brass approved it only because they figured the Boneyard bomber was going to be lost eventually anyway. They didn't realize they were sending a porcupine into a balloon factory. At 25,000 feet over the Bougainville coast, the eager beavers were 200 miles from the nearest friendly support. The mapping cameras were clicking in the belly. Then, the tail gunner's voice crackled. Contacts, 6 o'clock low, climbing, it's a swarm. 17 Japanese Zeros rose from the jungle airfields like angry wasps. They saw a lone, battered B-17 and assumed it was an easy kill. They followed the textbook. A 1,200 high, head-on attack aimed straight at the weak nose of the bomber. The lead Zero pilot lined up his shot, expecting to see a terrified American pilot. Instead, he saw the muzzle of Zeamer's fixed .50 caliber. Zeamer didn't bank away. He skidded the 30-ton bomber like a sniper rifle and squeezed the trigger on his yoke. A stream of heavy lead smashed the Zero's engine block, and the fighter disintegrated in midair. The Japanese squadron was in shock. The helpless bomber was fighting back with the aggression of a fighter. Sarnowski, in the nose, swung his twin-mount .50 cals, sawing through a second Zero as it tried to peel away. But the Zeros regrouped. For the next 40 minutes, the sky turned into a wall of lead. 20mm cannon shells punched holes the size of dinner plates in the wings. Shrapnel tore through the oxygen lines. The price of honor. A cannon shell exploded in the nose, blowing Sarnowski backward. His stomach was ripped open by shrapnel. He was mortally wounded. At the same time, a bullet shattered Zeamer's left knee and another hit his wrist. The cockpit floor was slick with blood. Sarnowski, dying, dragged himself back to his gun. He refused to let go of the trigger. Zeamer, with one good leg and one good hand, wedged his broken limb against the rudder pedal and kept the plane level. they weren't done with the photos. The eager beavers shot down 5 Zeros confirmed, with dozens more damaged. The Japanese, low on fuel and terrified by the flying fortress from hell, finally broke off the attack. Zeamer was fading. His vision was tunneling from blood loss. He had to fly 400 miles back to Port Moresby through the Owen Stanley Mountains. He flew by fingertip feel, sensing the vibrations in the frayed control cables. When the plane touched down at 7 Mile Drome, it had no brakes and no hydraulics. It rolled off the runway and into the dirt. The ground crew ran to the wreck and stopped in horror. The B-17 was literally lace. There were 187 bullet holes and 5 gaping cannon wounds. The main wing spar was cracked. By every law of engineering, the plane should have snapped in half over the mountains. It hadn't flown back on physics. It had flown back on pure spite. Joseph Sarnowski died shortly after being pulled from the nose. Jay Zeamer survived, though he would spend years in hospitals and never fly combat again. They both received the Medal of Honor, the only time in history 2 men on the same crew received the award for the same mission. The photos they took? They were perfect. They revealed every hidden gun and reef, saving thousands of Marine lives during the invasion of Bougainville. Old 666 was towed back to the Boneyard, but this time, nobody called it a lemon. It sat as a silent monument to the fact that you can measure horsepower, but you can't measure grit. Jay Zeamer lived to be 88, a quiet man who kept his Medal of Honor in a drawer. He proved that a misfit is just a hero who hasn't found his fight yet. And the next time someone tells you your equipment is junk or the odds are too high, remember the flying porcupine. Remember that as long as you have enough gas to fly and enough guts to pull the trigger, you are never out of the fight. We didn't do the math, we just did the job. Jay Zeamer. If the story of the Boneyard Predator fired you up, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that real history, the gritty, unpolished kind, deserves to be seen. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the archives. What's your favorite misfit story from history? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.